Hi, this is Sara Mikesell with the Pig site, working in collaboration with LifeStart Swine. And today we're online with Dr. Robert Knox. He is an animal science professor and serves as a state swine extension specialist. Dr. Knox has worked at the University of Illinois for about 24 years. His research is focused on reproductive physiology, and he's authored peer-reviewed articles on gilt management, poor behavior, artificial insemination, the impact of housing on pig reproduction, and many other topics. Thanks for being with us today, Dr. Knox.
Yes, a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Very good. So today we want to talk about gilt development. So let's dive right in. What causes poor gilt development?
Yeah, I would say, starting chronologically, it would be probably poor selection of gilts at birth. So if you're not selecting the right animals, slow growth during development up to puberty, and then, of course, excessive stress, and that becomes a very long list. But during development, this could be from repeated mixing, and they have to reestablish dominance order, crowding, not allowing enough space for the gilts to move and be comfortable. Items or anything that actually limits feed intake during development. Out of feed events. So these would be, accidental or weather related or anything. Those animals don't gain that time back. Poor air quality, or poor environment, a very dirty environment, or high levels of gas, dust, or ammonia. Excessive heat and cold stress. I mean, there's not much you can do about heat stress, but you have to have fans or something that at least allows air to move. And of course, in various places throughout the world, it can get very cold in certain in northern hemisphere. And you have these animals can be subjected to a very cold environment. And then lastly, injury or illness. So diseases that take these animals off feed, illness, diarrhea, all of those things add days on to puberty.
Very good. And can you share some tips for positive gilt development? So now let's talk about the flip side of that coin.
Yeah. So select gilts from the start, right? The correct gilts, and the question would be which are going to be the correct gilts. Well, you select the animals that you need or you have, but the data suggests that if you select gilts from a dam that is in her second parity or more, second, third, or fourth, these gilts have a better immunity. They're actually better. They grow better than selecting from a parity 1 female. There's nothing wrong with the parity 1 female. It's just they don't produce as much milk and as much antibodies as the higher parity sows. I would also say it would be important, since these are breeding gilts that you're developing, that you select from a mother that had early puberty, because puberty is a moderately heritable trait. You want to probably select gilts born in a large litter. That goes without saying, but even though litter size is lowly heritable, it is still heritable, and we are chasing large litter size right now. But the heaviest pigs in a litter, even in a large litter, tend to grow faster, and we now have a problem with animals getting too heavy for breeding. And so maybe you want to stay away from the heaviest animals and go more towards the adequate or medium plus. So, and avoid the tendency of getting the heaviest ones, because they will be heavy throughout their entire development period. Again, adequate pen space. People are always mixing animals and they're moving, and that's inevitable. But these repeated mixing events, it does cause stress, and the animals that are dominant probably do okay, but not everybody can be dominant, and so this can cause problems. I would I would probably also indicate that the animals that you select from birth should meet targeted weights at weaning. And maybe you don't need to weigh every single one, but you at least could look at them. And then by 100 days, they should be making weight targets, or at least you can recognize animals that are falling behind. And then by 160 days of age, getting ready to start induction, they really should be reaching their target weight. And now it would be good to start measuring them or weighing them if you can. And then selecting gilts with good underline, 14 well-spaced teats or nipples anyway, and animals that responds well to boar exposure in the first, second, and third to fourth week after starting boar exposure. And we want a strong standing estrus and some vulval swelling. And if these gilts are growing very fast, you may have to consider, at least for those, you might have to start earlier induction so that you can maybe get them induced earlier and breed them closer to a target weight.
A little bit about induction for folks who may not know that term or understand what all's
Okay.
involved there.
Sorry, I use the term induction for puberty induction. And what we're talking about is the boar is the strongest stimulus for advancing puberty in gilts and for detecting estrus. So repeated boar exposures at some starting age, I used 160, many 160 days of age. Some people will start at 170. In other places around the world where animals are maybe under a little bit more tropical environment, equatorial, their animals don't grow necessarily as fast. And so sometimes you'll see induction a little bit later, 180, 190 days of age for them. But in North America and Brazil and other places around the world, Australia, many folks are trying to induce between 160 and 170. And then you wind up with a kind of a slow induction, and it keeps building over time. Most of the animals will express puberty by the third week, so it becomes cumulative. And then, our concern is literally the tail enders, because some of these animals can spread out over 60 days and some will never express puberty. Right. So that becomes a big issue. So induction, really, the important thing is quality of boar exposure, daily boar exposure, and doing it for the proper amount of time. People will have to consider whether they are doing physical boar in the pen or gilts to the boar, or fence line boar exposure. Each of those can work real well, but you have to do it correctly.
Very good. So it's just that exposure is really the key, it sounds like, right?
Yeah. Yep. You want an active boar, boar who becomes vocal, who gets excited about seeing the gilts, as opposed to an animal who just simply, or a male who just simply lays down and could care less and is looking for feed. Right. So that's important to kind of rotate, use multiple boars, allow them to breed. That gets them very excited, not every day, but periodically, to keep that libido very high. So those and providing good quality exposure for the proper amount of time, typically 10 to 15 minutes, will do the trick.
That's interesting because it does take labor, right? That's a labor, requirement for an operation to have a team of people or a person who's really in charge of managing that. We all know labor can be an issue right now, right?
Yeah,
so,
very much so.
It's one of those things you have to kind of build into your plan, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good comment too, because things happen where we have limited labor, and other things often take the priority over reproduction. And we understand that, but you don't make up those days, and you wind up adding open days, and you miss animals. A joke that we like to talk about is many gilts don't like to work on weekends, because if you look at estrus expression, you'll notice that many of them don't express estrus on Saturday or Sunday.
Right,
And holidays, they don't like to work on holidays. But
right.
it just shows that, yeah, we are in a labor crunch. So
Yeah.
yeah, it should be a priority.
Very good. And so let's talk and we'll switch gears because you talked a little bit about this up front from a, poor gilt development is this idea of feed, right?
Mhm.
So when feeding a developing gilt, what are the most important areas to focus on? What gives you those positive outcomes?
Yeah, I think what I would focus on for my farm is I would definitely have an expert check the diets,
Right.
just to make sure, and whether that's a feed specialist or somebody in your consulting world, somebody evaluates and says, yes, your diets are correct, proper amounts of lysine, et cetera. Um, and during the development period, you want to make sure your animals have access to feed all the time.
Right.
As opposed to just once daily feeding, they'll periodically eat better if they have continuous access. You need to make sure that there are adequate number of waterers around, because water intake drives feed intake. So it's also good to be checking the water quality, whether there's an odor, whether there's contaminants in there as well. Um, Oftentimes we're pulling water out of wells, and so sometimes the water quality may not be as great as it should be. I would also say check for access, safe access on the feeders. Sometimes feeders get damaged, they get sharp edges, and you'll notice that animals will have lesions around the face. So you need to take care of those, grind them down or whatever. Um, I would also say, as again, not to berate the subject, but um, anticipate problems and try to prevent out of feed events. It happens in winter. Certainly a lot of it happened on that COVID outbreak when there wasn't workers, but there wasn't much you can do. But if have a history of feed intake, I think there's probably ways to at least anticipate how are we going to get through that. Um, Avoid wet, moldy feeds accumulating outside in the bin, and also in the feed trough itself. Water gets in there. Pigs like to play with their feed, and it can mold, and that's not good either. Um, After pubertal estrus, I would also say make sure the gilts continue to get at least twice daily feed, even when they're moved into stalls,
Mhm.
because these animals are still growing. And I think one of the worst things that you can do is when you do pick up pubertal estrus, they get moved into a stall, get ready to bred, and then they are on limited feed before breeding. And that's not good, because these animals have to keep a trajectory. They have to continue to gain weight to reach mature weight, and even during gestation. Um, and again, we don't have a great answer, Sarah, for the heavy gilts, but it is a concern. And I would say, even if the gilts are heavy, you can't restrict their feed. You just have to kind of go with the flow, but you can limit feed them a little bit, take down their feed maybe by 25%, and just try to get them bred at target weight, and not let them get too heavy.
Got it. Very good. And you talked about kind of these nut feed events where you don't have. What is an example of what might happen, Rob? That sows might, or excuse me, gilts might not get fed.
Yeah, I would say, there's weather related roads.
Right. A
You know,
snowstorm or things like that come up, and people just can't get to work to do it. Right? Is
that's
that
correct,
fair?
right? And I would say also, every now and then maybe an employee can't make it for a family emergency or something like that, and they're scrambling to find somebody else to get in there.
Right.
Sometimes the feed truck isn't called on time and it
Right.
doesn't make it. So I mean, those are probably just the standard ones. Things get delayed. Bad weather someplace else doesn't allow
Right.
something to get in time. So I don't know what else you do for that, Sarah, but those sorts of things probably don't happen just once in a 6-month period of time. They
Right.
probably happen, if they happen once, they're probably happened other times as well. And so that can actually affect an entire pen or an entire group of animals in development. So,
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to people about this before that, these non-feed events, right, can cause ulcers. They can cause all kinds of issues in the gut. And so that consistency of feed, it sounds like not just what you're feeding them, but the consistency of having feed available on a regular basis is really important.
yeah, and I think even, in these stressful out of feed events for the pigs, when there's no feed, they probably turn towards, other behaviors that come along with their stress, such as picking on other pigs or, being not as accommodating to their pen mates. So yeah,
Yeah. I suppose we as humans do that as well. When we're hungry, we're not as pleasant to be around, right?
that is correct.
Very good. Well, are there any other information that you wanted to share with us, Rob?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for all this information today. We really appreciate it.
You are welcome. It was my pleasure.
This is Sara Mikesell with the Pig Site.